Episcopacy is the name that we give the type or style of church government in the early church. You'll see this picture. I got it off Wikipedia. It is a picture of the Church of St. John Lateran in the Vatican, in Rome. And that, my friends, is a chair, a big fancy chair, also called a throne by some, right? It is officially the Cathedra Petri, the Petrine chair, the throne of Peter, because that is where the Pope sits. And when he sits there, he can make pronouncements. He can rule as the bishop or overseer of Rome. The Pope's chair. Kind of fancy. Kind of cool picture here. But this is the style, right, of government, the church government that develops in the early church. But in my opinion, and I think my opinion's right, it is not something that comes out of the New Testament, okay? The New Testament, when the church is being established by the apostles under Jesus, has these words that they use for church leaders. There's apostles, the sent ones, which in one sense can be all missionaries, right? Any Christian that's sent out to make disciples in another place can be called an apostle. But in another sense, the New Testament uses it for disciples who specifically saw Jesus Christ in the flesh, risen from the dead. And there's only a limited number of them, and they, being the oldest disciples and the ones who specifically saw Jesus after he died and came back to life, they have a special status, a special authority, right, in the early church. This is guys like Peter, Paul, James, the brother of, or half-brother of the Lord. These are the ones who write the New Testament and or under their guidance have the New Testament written. Then, in each city, you'll see this in Titus and Timothy, they have people appoint leaders for the individual congregations. So, for instance, Titus on Crete, he starts appointing different elders. Another word would be presbyters. That's the Greek word, right, for elder. And they are the ones who are in charge of teaching and preserving the true doctrine and discipline of these local churches. The overseers, or episcopoi, is the Greek word, is another word that the New Testament uses, but, and this is a key point, they use it as a synonym for elder. Okay, so they're not two different things, they're just two different words for the same office, the same leadership role. The same goes for the word pastor, which is shepherd, right? Pastor, shepherd. That's just another word for elders, for leaders in the church. As Jesus is the good shepherd, so he has under shepherds in all the churches. And the deacons or ministers, servants, right? All the local congregations have these, and they have kind of special missions, either to, like Phoebe, for instance, in the book of Romans, she goes and takes the letter that she then reads to the Romans and then interprets it for the Romans. That is one role that they had. Or in Acts, the first deacons are the ones who are chosen, the 7, right? Chosen to make sure that the food and the money is passed out to everyone in a righteous way. They're the ones that do that. So there's really, if you want to look at it this way, there's only like 2 levels. And I guess you can say levels, although I'm not even sure that there is that much of a hierarchy there necessarily. But you can say there's 2 types, at least, of church leader. There's the elders and there's the deacons. All the other words are just synonyms for those 2 positions. And I guess you could say the apostles, right? The apostles. So maybe there's 3. But here's Ignatius, right? He is an apostolic father. He is the generation right after the apostles. He ends up dying around AD 110 in Rome by being given to the beasts. You can see this picture here of the lion and the dog tearing him to pieces while he is being welcomed into the arms of his master, Jesus. Here is the city he's from, Antioch. Nowadays it's in southern Turkey, but in that day it was considered part of the province of Syria. It's a very important city in the Roman Empire. It's like the third most important city after Alexandria down here in Egypt, and of course, the capital, Rome. Antioch is, remember, where the disciples are first called Christians. And it's also the sending church of Paul and Barnabas and Silas. So it's a very important church in church history. Ignatius becomes the bishop there, and he has a slightly different take, a slightly, I guess you could even say maybe a development or a progression of what the New Testament says, okay? He is really strongly for an episcopal form of government, whereby there is 3 levels still in the church, but instead of there being the apostles, the elders, and the deacons, now instead of the apostles, the bishops have taken their place. He takes this word, episcopoi, the bishop, and he makes the bishops something more like the apostles above the elders and presbyters in the city. Here's some quotes from him. He wrote several letters as he was on his way to die. Let us be careful then not to set ourselves in opposition to the bishop in order that we may be subject to God. It is manifest, therefore, that we should look upon the bishop even as we would upon the Lord himself. Your bishop presides in the place of God, and your presbyters in the place of the assembly of the apostles. As therefore the Lord did nothing without the Father, so neither do ye anything without the bishop and the presbyters. Okay, he has a very high view of church leadership, and he says, hey, we got to obey them. This is how we ought to do it. They will protect us from heresy, and they will keep us united under God. This view, right, the Ignatian view, is the monarchical view. The monarchical bishop and this view is called episcopal government, right? The bishop, each city has their bishop, and then they're over all the other church leaders in that city. Later on, it expands, right, to not just be the bishop over the city, but he's also over the surrounding countryside too. That bishop would be called a diocesan bishop. It is interesting to note that Ignatius has some contemporaries, right? Polycarp and Clement. You've already learned about them. They are also apostolic fathers, also disciples of the apostles. And they, in their writings, while they might call themselves a bishop or an overseer, they don't necessarily put themselves above the other church leaders in the city. They are one of a group of leaders. The elders are a group, right? So, this view of Ignatius isn't necessarily widespread yet, but it quickly becomes that way, okay? Ignatius' view becomes, by maybe the middle, I think your book said the middle of the 2nd century, the 150s, around the time that Polycarp dies, this view of the church has spread. This is how the government of the church is going to run. Each city has a bishop, and under the bishop they have presbyters. And the presbyters, under them, there's the deacons, and so on and so forth. Until the Reformation, this is the way that the church is run. Now, after the Reformation, we'll learn they start switching things up, and some churches go back to more of a New Testament view of church government. All right. Episcopacy.